Thank you, Ardian, and thanks to both Actuary and SOA for having this panel today. I think it's important to look at the issues as well as how some of the challenges in the Middle East connect to the other issues that the United States is trying to address. So as I was reflecting on both the theme of the conversation today and my research, I think there are a couple key points that I want to make. And I think the first one is, as we look at the counterterrorism threat, yes, the direct threat to the homeland, to the US and to Americans has decreased, but we still see a significant network, both from the Islamic State and Al-Qaeda, that crisscrosses the Middle East into South Asia, as well as, of course, across into Africa, where it's growing most rapidly due to security conditions and the challenges in responding to those conditions currently. And while those threats and threat groups are expanding, it means that there is an opportunity in the future for the groups to refocus their energies on the United States or on Europe. So similar to the pattern that we saw coming out of the Islamic State in Iraq in 2014, where all of a sudden it launched its networks at Europe, and the European countries experienced a massive wave of terror attacks, 2015, 2016. The challenge that I see is that even as we are moving forward in an era where resources toward counterterrorism have been reduced due to the emphasis on the strategic competition with China and the ongoing conflict in Ukraine, as well as the many other challenges the US is trying to address today, including the long-term challenge of changing climate conditions, which are helping drive some of the conflicts. The resources for counterterrorism have started to decrease. So there's been a shift because the United States is no longer as focused on counterterrorism, and because the direct threat is no longer present. And behind that is kind of the core challenge that we face today, which is, even back when we had fully resourced our counterterrorism operations, they were only effective to a certain degree. They were incredibly good at eliminating the immediate threat, at disrupting networks, at taking back the terrain. But as the story gets told in the various theaters in Yemen, in Iraq, in Syria, in Somalia, and we're watching it right now inside of Mali and elsewhere, when the pressure is released, we see these groups reestablish themselves simply because the US counterterrorism approach doesn't prevent the groups from reconstituting. So the US is still trying the same approach with fewer resources, which means that we actually are introducing a lot more risk towards our counterterrorism activities in general. And I would say, as we are applying the counterterrorism approach, yes, it seems surgical, it seems like it's low resource and a good idea to have this over the horizon posture, the idea of being able to effectively base outside of the countries and engage inside of Iraq, Syria, or elsewhere, recognizing that we do have troops on the ground there, to be able to contain the threats. But it doesn't advance other American interests. So, the key challenge that I see facing the United States today with regard to some of the Middle East activities is that we are looking at threat groups that are still incredibly focused on the Arab world. They're awaiting opportunities to re-expand. We're relying on an approach that was resource intensive, effective in the short term, less effective over the medium term, and certainly not effective over the long term. And it is not advancing American interests with regard to our partners in the region. Yes, their demand is for counterterrorism, certainly. But as we kind of look at what else the United States can be doing, we can be having a much more stabilizing impact if we were to reframe how we were to address these groups on the ground, if we were to look at the security conditions and also understand how the socioeconomic and political conditions are driving some of those security challenges. I think as any watcher of the region can note, the Syrian conflict is not over yet, and there are still conditions on the ground that are allowing the Islamic State to come back, in addition to other challenges up in the Northwest that Aaron can talk to at length much better than I can. The same thing in Iraq, where we still have a disenfranchised population, and where we've seen clear military and security-based objectives achieved, but we actually haven't addressed the underlying issues. So, I think as we're looking at the top line challenges for the US in managing all of these complex challenges across the board, it's really going to be, in my opinion, determining a new approach to a long-term terrorism problem for the United States that actually goes to the source of the conflicts themselves and the ability and the opportunities that those conflicts create for Al-Qaeda and the Islamic State to strengthen, and works to address them within a framework of competition, within a framework of advancing American interests rather than just countering the terrorist side. So I know you want this to be a discussion, so I will end there, but I certainly have a lot more to say. Thank you.